Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into a really foundational, fascinating period of history. Early America, contact, conquest, and cultures collide. We're focusing on period 1, so that's 1491, right up to 1607.
Right. And our goal here, our mission for this deep dive, is really to pull out the most important pieces, the key takeaways, maybe some surprising facts from the sources. Think of it as your shortcut to getting a solid handle on this era, because it truly reshaped, well, multiple continents.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to remember this isn't some simple story of discovery. It's about deep, often really brutal changes. Changes that affected everyone involved on all sides of the Atlantic. It really set the stage for so much that followed.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Before Europeans arrived, North America wasn't empty. It was teeming with diverse societies. We have to challenge that old idea of just one Native American group, right? The sources really highlight this incredible diversity. Different groups adapting in unique ways to wherever they lived. It's truly remarkable how deeply the environment shaped everything. Social structures, how they got food, their cultures. A huge factor, especially starting in Mesoamerica, was maize cultivation. Corn. As it spread north, it fueled economic growth, allowed for more complex societies, advanced irrigation. You look at Central and South America, the Aztecs or Mexico, their capital, Tenochtitlan, huge. Maybe 300,000 people, complex canals. And the Mayas in Yucatan, with their cities and temples, sophisticated water systems. Or the Incas in the Andes, ruling millions, mastering potato farming in the mountains. All three built these large urban centers, complex politics, religions, all centered around maize.
And that power of corn, it wasn't just in the South, it moved north. You see groups like the Hohokam in Arizona. I mean, incredible irrigation canals in the desert that supported villages, complex pottery, trade. And the Pueblo people, also in the Southwest. Farmers building homes right into cliffs sometimes. Highly organized societies.
But then you contrast that sharply with drier places like the Great Basin or the Plains. There you find more nomadic groups, hunter-gatherers, like the Ute, Apache, Shoshone. They relied heavily on bison, on being mobile. It was a direct response to the scarcity of resources in those really arid regions.
Right, a completely different strategy for survival.
Yeah.
Then in areas with more water, more fertile land, you get a mix, right? Farming and hunting and gathering, which allowed for more permanent villages.
Exactly. Think about the Northeast, the Mississippi River Valley. You have the Iroquois Confederacy, famous for the Three Sisters, corn, beans, squash, grown together. And significantly, many were matrilineal societies, lineage through the mother, women holding real influence, or the Hopewell in Ohio, building those huge earth mounds, extensive trade networks, the Delaware or Lenape, Mid-Atlantic, permanent villages, matrilineal clans again. And down in North Carolina, the Secton, settled farmers, organized towns.
And we can't forget the coasts and forests, just amazing ingenuity there too. Pacific Northwest, the Chinook, permanent plank houses, lived off those massive salmon runs, had a clearly stratified society. Down in California, the Chumash, masters of the sea, building these incredible plank canoes, the Tomals for trade. Up north, the Aleutes in the Aleutian Islands, hunting marine mammals, living in semi-underground homes. And the Tlingit in Alaska, BCC, master fishers, famous for totem poles, potlatch ceremonies.
The big takeaway here, I think, is the sheer diversity. Native American societies weren't one thing. They were this kaleidoscope of hundreds of distinct cultures, each deeply connected to their specific environment. It shows incredible human adaptability.
Okay, so we had this vibrant, complex world existing here. Now let's shift across the Atlantic. What was happening in Europe that sort of lit the fuse? What drove them to want to cross this huge ocean? The sources keep coming back to those three Gs, right? Gold, glory, and God.
That's a good framework. First, gold. Just a powerful desire for wealth, new sources of it. The Crusaders had seen Asian luxuries, spices, silk, sugar. But the land routes, like the Silk Road, were mostly controlled by Muslim empires, so prices were high. That created this huge push to find direct sea routes to Asia. Then, glory. You have these European states consolidating power, becoming more competitive. Populations were bouncing back after the Black Death. Monarchs like Ferdinand and Isabella in Spain, they unified their kingdoms, wanted more power, more prestige, new trade routes to basically one-up their rivals. And finally, God. A real religious fervor, especially for Catholic Spain and Portugal. Finding new lands meant an opportunity, even an obligation they felt to spread Christianity. And, these three weren't really separate. They were tangled together. Piety could justify the quest for riches and power. It's complex.
And they needed the means to do it. Technology and key figures played a big role, like Portugal's Prince Henry the Navigator. He didn't sail across himself, but he pushed exploration down the African coast, setting up trading posts.
Right, they were mastering maritime tech. The caravel ship faster, more maneuverable, astronomical tables, the astrolabe for navigation, the sternpost rudder for better steering. Portugal got a head start using these.
Which definitely motivated Spain. Portugal was finding success making money. So Ferdinand and Isabella, after finishing the Reconquista, uniting Spain, they were eager to compete.
Exactly. Portugal kind of had the route around Africa locked up. Italians controlled the Mediterranean trade. So Spain sponsored Columbus's idea, sail west to reach the east.
And in 1492, he lands, not in the East Indies, but the Caribbean, San Salvador.
Yeah.
He calls the people Indians, sees they have gold jewelry.
And that little detail, the gold, that was crucial. It fueled the Spanish imagination and greed. Columbus went back, reported there was more wealth, brought back enslaved natives. That really opened the floodgates for more Spanish voyages, conquest. So the big question becomes, how did all these motivations, these first encounters, trigger such a massive global shift?
Yeah, this is where we get to the Columbian Exchange, which is just monumental, this huge transfer of plants, animals, metals, people, and devastatingly, diseases back and forth between the Old World, Europe, Africa, and the New World, the Americas. It fundamentally changed societies, economies, environments on all three continents.
The impact on Europe was enormous. New foods from the Americas, corn, potatoes, tomatoes, cacao, tobacco, they revolutionized European diets. This led to huge population growth, people living longer, and then there's the mineral wealth. All the gold and silver taken from the Aztec and Inca empires, it made Spain incredibly rich. But it did more than that. This flood of wealth helped break down the old feudal system and really kickstarted the rise of capitalism. An economic system based on private ownership, free exchange, investment. It fundamentally shifted economic power.
And this is all supported by better ships, better navigation tools like the compass and astrolabe. Makes those transatlantic voyages possible, right? And the way they funded these trips changed too. Spain started with mercantilism, state-controlled economy, trying to maximize national wealth.
Right, heavy government involvement. But later, especially for the English, you see joint stock companies emerge. Basically, investors pool their money to fund expeditions. This spreads the risk and allows for much larger-scale exploration and colonization.
But while Europe is booming, the Americas, it's a different story, a devastating one.
Primarily because of disease. That's the absolute critical factor. Native Americans had been isolated for thousands of years, no immunity to old world germs like smallpox, measles, influenza. The numbers are just staggering. Hispaniola. Maybe 300,000 indigenous people initially, wiped out. The Inca Empire, down from maybe 9 million to 500,000 in a century. Central Mexico, the Aztec and Maya regions, maybe 40 million down to 3 million over 150 years. This massive die-off, this demographic collapse, it made European conquest much, much easier. Cortez conquering the Aztecs with relatively few men. Disease played a huge role alongside his native allies.
And Europeans also brought their crops and animals.
Yes. Rice, wheat, soybeans, oats, citrus fruits, they became staples in the Americas. And animals like horses, pigs, cattle, chickens. Horses were revolutionary for many native groups. Changed hunting, warfare, travel completely.
So the Columbian Exchange, it creates this interconnected world for the first time, really. But it's built on this terrible paradox. Europe's rise is directly linked to the devastation of indigenous populations in the Americas. The costs were immense and mostly borne by them. So Spain finds itself with this huge new empire. How did they even start to organize it? Especially, how did they get the labor they needed?
Their first attempt was the encomienda system. The Spanish crown basically granted tracts of land and the native people living on that land to Spanish settlers, the encomenderos. In theory, the deal was the settlers would Christianize the natives in return for their labor. They even had this document, the requerimiento, sort of a legal justification read out, often in Spanish, which natives didn't understand. It said, submit to Spain and Christianity, you'll be protected. Resist, and subjugation or death was justified.
That's pretty one-sided.
It was. And it didn't really work well for the Spanish either. Natives were dying from disease in huge numbers, plus they knew the land and could often escape. Labor supply was unreliable.
Which leads us to the horrific shift towards using enslaved African labor.
Exactly. Now, slavery existed in Africa before Europeans arrived, but it was often different. Maybe prisoners of war, sometimes temporary rights might exist, usually wasn't passed down generations. But the European demand for labor, especially for cash crops like sugar, created this massive market. They traded guns, textiles, alcohol for people. This fueled conflict within Africa as some groups raided others to capture people to sell. And Europeans developed justifications, twisted twisted interpretations of the Bible, like the so-called Curse of Ham, to falsely claim Africans were destined for servitude. It was self-serving rationale for a brutal practice.
And why Africans, from the Spanish perspective?
While tragically they saw advantages, Africans had more immunity to European diseases compared to natives, and being forcibly brought to a strange land, escape was much harder. This led to the horrors of the Middle Passage, the voyage across the Atlantic. Millions died just on the ships from disease, starvation, brutality.
And these labor systems, encomienda, then widespread African slavery, they shaped the whole social structure, didn't they?
Absolutely. It led directly to the Spanish caste system, the Sistema de Castas. This was a really rigid hierarchy based on race and birthplace. It was about social control, but also economics. And your place determined your taxes, your rights. Top were the Peninsulares born in Spain. They held the highest positions. Then Criollos, or Creoles, people of pure Spanish descent, but born in the Americas. Below them, mestizos, mixed Spanish and Native American ancestry. And mulattoes, mixed Spanish and African ancestry. And at the very bottom were enslaved Africans and Native Americans. This system ingrained racial hierarchy deep into the fabric of colonial society across the Americas. Its legacy is long.
So you have these profoundly different cultures colliding. What were some of the core worldview differences that caused so much misunderstanding and conflict?
They were fundamental. Take religion. Native beliefs were often animistic or pantheistic spirits in nature, the world alive and sacred. Very different from the exclusive, hierarchical monotheism of Spanish Catholicism. Gender roles. Many native societies were matrilineal descent traced through the mother. Women often had significant power, especially in agriculture and community decisions. Spanish society was strongly patriarchal. Huge clash there. Family. Native societies often centered on large, extended kinship networks. The Spanish emphasized the nuclear family. Land use. This is a big one. For most natives, land was communal, spiritual, not something you owned and sold. For the Spanish, private property was central. That difference alone caused endless conflict. And power. Native leadership was often consensus-based. Leaders earned influence. Spanish power was top-down, monarchical, imposed by authority.
So with these deep divides, how did interaction actually happen? Was it all just conflict, or was there exchange too?
There was some exchange, definitely. Natives were often eager to get European metal tools, horses, guns. These things really changed their lives. And Europeans wanted access to things like the fur trade. Sometimes they'd even arrange marriages with native women to secure alliances and trade rights. But misunderstandings were constant.
And the resistance was real and often fierce.
Absolutely. Even when natives adopted Christianity, they often blended it with their own beliefs, like the Pueblo incorporating Christ into their existing pantheon. When Spanish priests tried to stamp out these traditional practices, it often led to resistance. Sometimes passive hiding practices, sometimes violent.
Like the Pueblo Revolt?
Exactly. That was huge. 1680, not 1610, actually, a correction there. Under Pope's leadership, they killed hundreds of Spanish, burned churches, drove the Spanish completely out of New Mexico for over a decade. A major victory, though temporary. But there were others. The Cupel Uprising in Yucatan, Maya resisting Spanish demands in 1546. The Mixton War in Mexico, 1540-42, fierce fighting against forced conversion and tribute. And earlier, the Taino rebellions in the Caribbean, starting around 1495. Sadly, those were brutally crushed, leading to that rapid depopulation we mentioned.
So news of all this brutality, these conflicts, it must have reached Spain. Were there debates about how natives should be treated?
Yes, there were significant debates at the highest levels. King Charles V convened thinkers to discuss it. You had figures like Juan Ginés de Sepúlveda, who argued natives were naturally inferior, that conquest was necessary to civilize them. But then you had Bartolomé de las Casas, a priest who had owned an encomienda, saw the horrors, and had a change of heart. He became a fierce defender of native humanity and rights. Argued the brutality was unchristian and counterproductive, driving people away from the faith.
He made quite an impact, didn't he?
He did. Though controversially, while arguing against native slavery, he initially suggested Africans could replace them as laborers, a position he later regretted. But his advocacy influenced the new laws of 1542. These laws tried to end native slavery and phase out the encomienda system.
They did work.
Enforcement was difficult. Colonists resisted fiercely, they depended on that labor, so the laws were often ignored or watered down. But the debate itself was important.
So wrapping up this period, 1491 to 1607, it's just packed with enormous change. You have this collision of vastly different worlds, the devastating impact of disease, new economic systems like capitalism taking root, fueled by colonial wealth, And these deeply hierarchical societies, like the caste system being established, it really set the stage, laid the groundwork, often a very brutal groundwork, for everything that came next in American history.
Absolutely. This deep dive, I hope, shows how history isn't just dates and names. It's this intricate web. The choices made back then, the motivations, the exchanges, the conflicts, they ripple forward. They continue to shape demographics, economies, cultural understandings, even today.
So as we think about this first era of contact and conquest, here's something to consider. What assumptions do you think we still carry today about new worlds or new encounters, maybe even about cultural differences? And how might understanding these complex, often painful early interactions challenge those assumptions?